Welcome to another episode of Comic Book University. I'm your host, Professor Bill. Let's get talking about Cottonmouth. Now, in the Netflix series for Luke Cage, the main baddie there is going to be Cottonmouth, Cornell Stokes. But in the comics, his original name is Cornell Cottonmouth. Yeah, not much of a nomenclature. Guys, the original Luke Cage Hero for Hire comic only went for 16 issues, but it didn't cancel. They simply decided to change the name because Hero for Hire, they thought, during this time, 70s, we need to have an actual superhero name. So they decided to call him Power Man instead of just Luke Cage. So he was Luke Cage Power Man. So from issue 17 on, it was called Luke Cage Power Man. In issue 17, he fought Iron Man, and in there we get a glimpse that he gets a package sent to his office. Now in issue 18, leaving the package to the side for a moment, Luke Cage is talking to his dead ex-girlfriend, ex-fiancée, Reva, and he's talking about how he wants to get together with Claire because she's so awesome, and yeah. So Claire actually happens to be there, and there's that little lovey-dovey soap opera-esque element that was always in comics back in those days. And right over top of Reva's grave, they kiss and say, yeah, we're going to be together forever, and blah, 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 blah. And just how disrespectful. Of course, when they get back and tell Dr. Burstein their problems, he sheds a little light on the reality of the situation that, hey man, you're technically dead. If you become not dead again, then you still got that shadow of prison facing over you because you're an escaped convict. I mean, what are you going to do? There's the quick little recap where Diamondback, Willis Stryker, his old running buddy, had actually stolen heroin from the syndicate, now they call it the organization, and planted it in Power Man's room, his home, and tipped off the police, and that's why he went to jail. He was framed. Well, of course, with Diamondback dead, there's not too much they could do as far as, look, here's a witness to prove my innocence. What Luke Cage decides to do, however, is to actually find the person who the heroin was stolen from in the first place and see if they can't get the records together and prove that, hey, this is actually what happened. To this end, he goes out and starts finding out different informants and, stooges who are willing to help him out and try and find out where the drugs actually came from. And while he's waiting for his people to get back to him, he busies himself by making some money by beating up on this guy named Steeplejack. Real chump stain, but whatever. So once the whole Steeplejack thing is resolved, side story pretty much, the informant goes and tells him that, hey, I've got some information for you, but I'm being chased by these guys. I need you to come to such and such street and meet me, and do it quick, man. So Luke Cage, he's got muscles out the wazoo, and he takes his wazoo as fast as he can, but it's just not fast enough. And he gets to the location, and there's his informant, guy's name is Flea, and he's laying there dying, and he's been poisoned. And he's like, I'm poisoned. He's like, hey man, tell me who did this to you. And he can only say, Cottonmouth. And he dies. So now he goes back to his office and he sees the package and he goes and opens it up. And all of a sudden these two snakes come out and attack his throat. Fortunately, he's got unbreakable skin. At the time, he didn't say unbreakable skin. He just said steel-like skin. But, character's evolving. Give him time. It'll become unbreakable. So he beats up the snakes. No, literally, actually ties them into a knot. But they survive somehow. Throws these snakes into a corner. Just then his secretary, dude, comes in. He's like, hey man, there's some people here who want to see you. And they help themselves in. And there's these two big guys. And their names are Mike and Ike. Yeah, that Mike and Ike. They actually named them Mike and Ike. Man, get that nonsense out of here. We're Comic Book University. We're not Candy University. Explaining candy. Anyway, Mike and Ike come in and they say, oh yeah, I see you got the package. Perfect timing, right? And says, hey man, listen, we just wanted to send that stuff so that you see that we mean business. Now, we need you to come down and talk to our main guy because he wants to talk to you. Now, clearly, Luke Cage is not going to go for that, so he puts the beating on these guys. And they're tough. They're just not Luke Cage tough. But he winds up beating them up, and Mike, he winds up putting the snakes real close to his face, saying, hey man, the snakes couldn't bite through my skin. Let's test them on you. He says, okay, man, I'll talk. I'll sing like a bird. And he tells him all about Cottonmouth and all this other stuff. So, yeah. So, yes, we're actually getting into Cottonmouth proper. But the build-up, it is crucial. So now he goes and meets up with the organization itself. And these are like the biggest drug dealers in all of Harlem and beyond. beats up through any number of people to get up to the main office. And when he gets up there, there's this guy Slick, and he's just like, hey man, what's up? You can't mess with us. And he runs after him, and he pretty much gets beaten like a jabroni. But meanwhile, Cornell Cottonmouth is actually sitting in his chair. He just didn't want to reveal himself. And then he spins around and says, you better get up. And man, he's a scary looking Joker. Like, this dude is all sorts of freaky. And Luke Cage is thinking, I'm just going to dispatch this guy. This guy is another powerhouse also. He may not have that unbreakable skin that Luke Cage has, but he's easily just as strong as he is. Catches his fist mid-swing and everything. And he's telling me, he's like, you need to calm down or you're going to get hurt. And that threat is real. So they talk a little bit, and Cornell explains how, listen, I want you to actually join my organization because I think that you and I are kindred spirits, and I think that we can actually work well with each other. Well, seeing as Luke realized that he's not going to beat this guy with his fists, he's got to think of another plan. So he tentatively agrees. He says, okay, I'm in. I'm your guy. Well, Slick, fortunately, isn't that dumb, and he says, no way, this guy needs to prove himself. So he comes up with the idea, how about he goes over and goes after Morgan's mob, because Morgan's mob, turns out they stole some heroin from us. So you go and get that back, and then, we'll actually talk about you joining the organization. Side note, every single time we hear about this organization or syndicate, somebody's always stealing some heroin from them. First it's Stryker, now it's Morgan and his mob. I mean, can't you keep your stuff in order? Biggest crime organization, but just you have no inventory control. What the hell, man? So Slick and a driver bring him over to Morgan's place, drop him off. He says keep the engine running. Well, he should have. Anyway, goes up, beats up a bunch of people. These guys see him coming from a mile away. His reputation is far exceeding him. Climbs up the side of the building like Spider-Man, except by sticking his fingers into the concrete because he's that strong. You guys have seen Wolverine do that before, right? With his claws? Anyway. So he goes into the window that Slick had pointed out to him, and he beats up the guys who were in there, and then uses a little detonator, and boom, explodes the safe that's there. Recovers the heroin, but on the way out, here come a whole bunch of guys, including Mr. Morgan himself, and this dude with a bazooka. Now, all of this took place from issues 17, 18, and 19. And Lin Win was the writer. All the other guys were the same, the artists and all that good stuff. But the writer, he was the original writer for the story. And then he quit, got fired, fell into the Bermuda Triangle, got captured by gremlins. I'm not really sure, but the idea is that now he's no longer on this comic book. So issue 20 actually had a new writer, Tony Isabella. Now, I feel that Tony did a good job. Unfortunately, he just tied it up. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute why this is important, the whole writer thing. Because Cage kind of takes out the guy with the bazooka quick, and he wasn't really much of a threat to begin with. Beats everybody up, takes Morgan himself hostage, and instead of actually bringing Morgan to Cottonmouth himself and stopping another head of a drug organization, he just kind of plays a trick on him and leaves him on the side of the street. It was really weak. It was very weak. Anyway, he has to pretty much take the subway to get back home because Slick told the driver, let's just get out of here. How rude. But he goes back to Cottonmouth. Slick is there. He says, hey man, here's your H back, and have at thee. And now I want to be fully into the organization. And Cottonmouth is happy. Slick is happy enough, So now Cottonmouth shows him the whole entire organization from beginning to end. He just shows him how the product is brought in, how it's cut, how it's distributed, the money, and all this different stuff. The only thing he doesn't show him is the one thing that Luke Cage actually wants, and that is the records that can clear his name. So at one point he figures, you know what, whatever, I've had enough, I'm good, let me just call the cops and give them a little bit of information. And he's doing this from Cottonmouth's office. Unfortunately, Cottonmouth and Slick come walking in and they notice this. They don't bother calling in extra guards or anything like that. They just decide to handle it personally. Slick just kind of gets tossed around all over the place. Cottonmouth is actually going head to head and kicking Luke Cage's butt. He's really hurting him bad. At one point, Cage does get a really good shot in with leverage and knocks Cottonmouth into Mr. Slick. And Slick happened to have been right by a window, so Slick ball in the corner pocket, and he falls out the window, and he dies splattered all over the sidewalk. You actually need a spatula to pick him up. Okay, they didn't actually bring out a spatula, but you get the point. So Cottonmouth is all sorts of distraught and is like, oh my God, no, my organization is finished. Luke Cage is like, okay, well, finished or not, baby, what I need you to do now is give me those records so that I can clear my name. And here's where it gets a little interesting. Slick was actually the records. According to Cottonmouth, Slick had a photographic memory. So all of the records were inside of Slick. Now that his brains are splattered all over the place, there are no more records. That's why Slick knows that his whole operation is down. Now back to the thing about the writer change. This was all summed up in one issue. Everything after the guy comes in with a bazooka, that was the end of issue 19. Issue 20, that's when you got Tony Isabella now on this project, and he just wraps up this story. We never see Cornell Cottonmouth again. If you guys remember from the Luke Cage class that we just had, I did mention that Cottonmouth was actually part of the Serpent Society. Well, I was wrong. Yeah, believe it or not, sometimes your teacher can be wrong. Anyway, I was wrong in the sense that there was actually two Cottonmouths. And the Cottonmouth from the Serpent Society is actually a completely different character, which would make sense. So the Serpent Society, Cottonmouth, who fights Captain America most of the time with the rest of the snake-type bad guys, not the best bad guys in the world. Those are actually different, even though similar powers and all that good stuff. Completely separate characters. This Cottonmouth, Cornell Cottonmouth, or like in the Netflix series, Cornell Stokes, we actually don't see this guy again until much later on. I'm talking about like this Spider-Verse event that just happened, what was that, last year? 2 years ago, max? Yeah, so we're talking about almost 40 years. 40 years. We don't see this character again. And even when he comes back, he's just a pimp, and I almost feel like they shouldn't have even wasted time bringing him back, but whatever. It's the idea that this was actually a really cool character. You see the character, the way he looked, and the idea of his legacy behind him and all this stuff that he's got going on. He's a really great plot point at the very least, and he can go head to head with Cage, and you don't just go around killing bad guys. I mean, this was the Marvel Comics, not the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Oh, burn on the fact that they keep killing all their really good bad guys. Okay, they kept Loki. As I was mentioning, he's just as strong as Luke Cage. He doesn't have the durability, but he is as strong as him, pound for pound. He also has really, really strong fang-like teeth. Now, they never actually explained where this came from, where his powers came from, or anything like that, but we could probably assume that he was a mutant because, I mean, at the end of the day, that's just what they did. Even back that early, when the X-Men were fairly newish and before Wolverine had come out, they didn't give an explanation, so it was probably just assumed that, hey, he must be a mutant. I mean, that's what they wound up doing with Namor the Submariner, and that's what they wound up doing with Whirlwind, a big Ant-Man enemy. Heck, Sam Wilson, the Falcon, was actually suggested to be a mutant in his own series for a pretty long time. They were just trying to cash in on the craze of, mutants make money, mutants make money. Yeah, they don't make money when they're owned by Fox. So guys, that's Cornell Cottonmouth in the comics. Clearly different from the Cornell Stokes, aka Cottonmouth, in the Netflix series. But hey, you gotta know the comics, that's the source material. So guys, this is Professor Bill, and class is dismissed.